I've been coming to St. Mark's since the late 80s. This was for like a kind of a young nerdy kid like me. This was one of the stops. In those days, I was like a hardcore Byrne fan and I was reading X-Men. There's no better metaphor for otherness than this sort of X-Men mutants. It recognizes the difficulties that people have, especially young people, especially adolescents, especially say kids of colors, because your freakishness, your otherness is sort of compensated by and with some power. I kind of felt like freak, man. I felt like a kind of a mutant growing up in the place I did, where I kind of wanted to be an artist, I wanted to be a writer. I had sort of political concerns in a community that was, fundamentally conservative. Plus throw adolescence on there, plus throw the kind of freakishness. Any kid growing up in a culture like ours, which really only kind of rewards very narrow and shallow things, and wow, suddenly X-Men seems to you like a message from a better universe.
When did you start reading Los Bros?
I started reading them about senior year in high school. Los Brothers Hernandez, for me, were perhaps one of the key motivators and inspirations for my art. One was not used to seeing Latinos in any sort of, represented in anything other than an absurdity. They were either like maids or they were just like, oh, you're a drug dealer or you're something ridiculous. But these guys created an entire world that resonated with mine. A world where people went to college, dropped out of college, where people joined bands, where people were like wrestling with, whether they loved one person or didn't, thinking about exes. This was a world that was more familiar to me than all the other toxic representations that I was seeing, whether it was in comic books, or in movies. I mean, these guys were really doing it by themselves for the indie comic scene, but also for representations of Latinos. I mean, they were among the best that we got and we still have.
What do you got there? Haven't read it. Tell me about it.
This is Jeff Smith, man. Jeff wrote Bone, which is like, was one of those supremely important independent comics that got picked up by Scholastic and then went on to sell millions of copies. Guy's just a genius, and he's one of the great promoters of independent comics. And so he came out with a new comic called Razzle, and it's sort of completely different genre, a completely different take. It's sort of this kind of grim, sort of universe-hopping, Tesla-obsessed noir thing. And you would never expect some guy who did a comic that was some sort of just Mutt and Jeff comedy mixed in with fantasy to suddenly turn around and just get straight grimy. Yeah. Lemire's the man. He writes one of my favorite books called Sweet Tooth. It's really an amazing book, and this is one of his first pieces. Perfect, Mind Management 3, Matt Kinn. This is something that I don't have, and I've been following this series. He's the man. Superb series. Kind of a psychic X-Men type thing, but written in the usual Matt kind style. Really, for a lot of kids who grew up in my generation, and maybe a lot of kids who grew up afterwards, comics is a cultural touchstone. References to The Watchmen, references to From Hell, references to X-Men. None of this is going to seem too strange, because this in some ways is our sort of cultural commons in this generation. I mean, comics are not only big business, but they're also a way that many people kind of understand the world through a certain amount of years. And I think that that's something that I was trying to get through when I was writing this book, is that in the end, it's less about whether Junior is a nerd or not, and more about that it's no surprise that any kid from any background is going to have some familiarity with this stuff.